You're listening to LibraryCast, your library podcast with me, Jeremy Thompson-Smith, Somerset Libraries Outreach Officer for the Mendips, bringing to you Libraries from Home. On today's edition of LibraryCast, we welcome Paul Dodgson, author and musician and radio producer. On the Road Not Taken. Why did you not take the road?
Well, the book is the story of my childhood journey as a musician, falling in love with music, becoming obsessed with it, wanting to be, I suppose, a rock star, not being a rock star, 34 years passing, and then deciding that I wanted to continue the journey that I hadn't continued when I was 19 years old. And so in 2016, I did take the road. I started to sing in public for the first time in 34 years. And I went out on the road singing at festivals, clubs, pubs, theatres, all over the place, and continued that story, which for me had never, ever finished. It had never gone away. And I suppose very simply why I didn't do it was I wasn't brave enough.
You weren't brave enough, and yet in all those years you have been working at the BBC, you've met and worked with some amazing people, and you've produced and written plays, and you've also staged plays in the Bath Royal Theatre, and yet you couldn't do it yourself, but you could do it and help others.
Well, I think I was sort of standing behind people. I wasn't actually on stage myself doing it. And there is a huge difference between the moment when you step forward to the microphone and you perform yourself, as to kind of asking other people to do it and writing for other people to do it. You're not in the firing line in the same way. It's a different thing when you stand there yourself and you do it and you actually perform. And of course, the more time that goes past, the harder it becomes. And, you know, I let 34 years go past before I stood on stage again and sang a song, which is an awful lot of time for my internal worries to start forming, to not want to make a fool of myself. And quite simply, I had to get over that.
I asked Paul what inspired him to write his book and also to explain his writing process.
I do a lot of planning. I do this with everything I write, but particularly with this book, with the book, planning was everything. So I started by working out what material I thought I had, what I could remember. And that was in a sort of stream of consciousness sense. I would just write things down, and I would do that at odd times on trains, on buses, on, you know, early in the morning, late at night. And then I put that into an order, a chronological order. So I thought there is a here, and then I looked at it and I thought there's a story here, there are gaps here. And then I worked out what bits were missing, and I kind of searched my memory banks for other stories that filled in those gaps. And I kept sort of filling in, a bit like, a sketch that you do just broad strokes to begin with, and then more and more detail. And then I got to a point where I gave myself about 3 months to write the book. And I was lucky I had a grant from the Society of Authors that meant I could dedicate most of the time to writing. And I worked out that in order to write the book in that time, I needed to write about 1,200 words a day. So that was always my objective, to do that. And I would get up in the morning. I would usually walk with my partner to work, and then go to a cafe or go to the library in Cardiff, where I live, somewhere out, and would write 1,200 words. And I wouldn't allow myself to stop until that was done. And then I would come home and I would then refine the material that had gone before. So I was editing as I was going along, and I just kept that up. And there were some days when I'd write 4,000 words, but I always made sure I wrote 1,200. I'd written a couple of memoir-based plays for the BBC, and it had just got to the point where I felt that I really wanted to write the story of my own life. I wanted to commemorate my parents, apart from anything else, because their lives, which were in some ways ordinary lives, but to themselves extraordinary, would perhaps have gone unremarked if I hadn't actually written something about them in the book. So there was a sense of wanting to preserve something of the past. And the writer Laurie Lee has a fantastic phrase. He called autobiographic writing snatching trophies from the dark. And I think that probably says it better than I could ever do, to take little moments from the past and write about them and commemorate them and celebrate them. The On the Road Not Taken was commissioned as a radio play for Radio 4, but the commissioner was very certain about what he wanted, and he only wanted a very small part of the contemporary story of me as an adult playing, whereas in the book that's extended much more. And then I kind of joined the stories up and I saw what I had. And then I started dramatizing them, and so adding dialogue. And then, of course, having to make it work as a story, because life isn't always a coherent story. It's, there are inconvenient kinks in it. And so we had to kind of adapt the real life story somewhat to make it work as a radio play. And then we came to record it, and there was a young lad who played me, which was a very strange experience. So I went to the studio. I narrated it as an adult, but I went to the studio, and there was this young chap who was playing me as a child. And so he was listening to me, seeing what I sounded like, and then imagining what I would have been like all those years ago, and then sort of doing an impression of me as he thought I would have been. And he did very well.
So I think it would be lovely if we could hear an excerpt from your book.
Yeah, so I'm going to read you the moment when I first perform again after 34 years. And instead of doing this at an open mic night somewhere, I decided to raise the stakes and managed to get myself a gig at the Bristol Old Vic Theatre. So there were an audience of 500 there. And I don't know why I did that now, really. It seems a stupid idea. But at the time, it felt like, if I'm going to do this after all this time, let's do it where the stakes are highest. So this is what happened. So here I am, sitting in the dark with 500 other people. Way below me on the stage of the Bristol Old Vic are the Gert Lush Choir, filling the theatre with the most beautiful sound. I start to count them, but when I reach 48, there's a tap on my shoulder. It's time. Follow me. I'll take you round the back. I stand up and do what I'm told. We pass through narrow corridors and down winding staircases to emerge in the wings. It's dark there now, and I breathe in the backstage smell of woodyard mingled with the distant bouquet of fresh paint. The backstage crew are all wearing black and talking quietly into headsets. I can see out onto the stage, and when the choir finishes, there is a wave of applause so loud it makes me step back into the darkness. Joe creeps up and whispers in my ear, "Okay, Paul, stand by." I take the long, slow walk out to centre stage. The lights are so bright, the auditorium is invisible. I give the guitar an exploratory strum and hear the chord ring out from the auditorium speakers. Then I play a little instrumental piece designed to settle my nerves and have an out-of-body experience. Nothing like this has ever happened to me in my whole life before, but for a moment I'm looking down from above, watching hands on the fretboard and thinking, it's me doing this, making this sound. It is so strange to be on this stage with all these people watching me, and so unlike the version I imagine when I'm as relaxed as the middle of a perfect holiday. Instead, I am hyper-aware of every tiny sound in the audience, the heat of the stage lights, and the minute changes in the facial expressions of the people in the front row. I introduced the first song by explaining why I didn't do this 30 years ago, following a script I've written and memorized. I was too scared to commit, I say, to this road with no route map, to the possibility of not being good enough, to the chance it would all go wrong. I got a proper job instead. Then on the spur of the moment, I ad-lib, if you can call working for the BBC a proper job. There is a modest ripple of laughter, and as I wait for it to subside, I cannot remember what I'm supposed to say next. The silence that follows opens up and is almost vertiginous. Then I remember. I'm going to sing a song now, I say. It was written by Emmylou Harris and is called Boulder to Birmingham. The introduction is 2 bars long, and the vocal begins without guitar on the 3rd beat of the 3rd bar. When I start to sing, I hear my voice amplified by the speakers in the theatre, sounding huge, bigger than me, as big as all the time I've waited for this to happen. I know what's coming from my mouth is not perfect, that this won't be one of those X Factor moments when the audience leap to their feet with tears in their eyes. But that doesn't matter, because I am actually singing. After the first chorus, it feels like a downhill run to the end of the song, and as the last chord dies, there is a wave of warm applause from the darkness.
For those that are listening to LibraryCast, who may think they have an idea, they may be feeling slightly anxious or worried, may not feel that they can commit a pen to paper or their voice to a song, what advice could you offer to help them start their road that they've not yet taken?
I can certainly say, from my experience, that the thought of failure was worse than the failures themselves. So throughout the years, I thought I had to be perfect. When I stood on stage, I had to get it right, 100% right. I had to be as good as the best singer in the world. And of course, that was never going to happen. And what I began to realize was that's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. The first thing is the idea of making mistakes are worse than the mistakes themselves. And the second thing is practice. I was given some advice on the way. Somebody said that I just needed to practice. It's a great thing with writing just to turn off the critic and write whatever is in your head. So sometimes I'll set a timer, write for 10 minutes and just not plan anything, not think about what I'm writing, just write. And I always find there's something interesting in there that becomes a starting point for something else.
I want to light a fire in the darkness so you can find your way home. I want to light a fire in the darkness so you know you're not alone. I want to light a fire in the darkness so you can find your way home. I want to light a fire in the darkness so you know you're not alone. You know you're not alone. You know you're not alone.
You've been listening to LibraryCast, your library podcast from Somerset Libraries, bringing you Libraries from Home.